Yay! Welcome everybody. I'm Catherine, and welcome Lynette.
Thank you very much.
Who know a little bit about us both. We were talking about the weather. We tend to always start these events with the weather. We're hoping we're going to keep good weather this evening, so the internet stays, as we've got thunderstorms in our area. But we will do our best to stay here. So we're here to talk about SchemaPlay and how it enables every child to know they're known and respected. So I think we just need to explore that a little bit, Lynette. Being known.
Yeah, feeling known. That's a really important perspective that we all need to have of ourselves. When we feel that people around us, they value us, that they are interested in us, it gives us so much. I mean, how we perceive ourselves is dependent upon how we think others view us. And if we can see that people are positively showing us that, actually, I'm really interested in what you want to do here, and I really value what it is that you're doing, it can make a huge difference. It really can. And that's why I believe SchemaPlay is so valuable, because if we have that positive perception of ourselves as capable learners who are contributing members of the community, then we're on the right road, aren't we? We've got that catalyst towards confidence taking place. And once we've got that confidence, then we've got the next catalyst to really enjoying learning. So for me, this is what we really want to know, the very essence of every child, so that they do feel known.
I think that's particularly in large settings. You know, if you've got a room of 24 children, you know, for every child to feel special and understood, and that somebody is interested in them is really important. That's the sort of thing that you're talking about, isn't it?
Totally, because if we just consider what we really hope for children, and that is that they are going to be independent, self-sufficient, sustainable citizens who can live in a world where, let's face it, we have no clue what jobs these young children are going to be doing, no clue at all. But if we've been able to support them to have mastery, to feel masterful, to have techniques to problem solve and to find solutions from their scheme anchors, then we are really going to help them to flourish, to be able to be flexible, to have these open eyes to see what is taking place, what do I need to do, and draw upon all their experiences they've ever had. And it's that wealth of experiences that I'm keen for children to have from where they feel capable, because we're all a product of our experiences. And you know, how we cope with things that come at us from different directions all depends on what we can bring from within us, how we can cope with things, what we know about, what we've seen before, and how we can problem solve our way through it. So this, in the very earliest years, is critical, I believe, for self-belief, but also for setting the road for the future.
I agree with you there. I'm very passionate about scaffolding children's learning, building upon what they already know and can do, and what they're interested in through their interests. I think that's really important. That's very much what we do in our software, is to help everybody, including parents, to do that. So things are stage appropriate, but through the children's interests. Because I think, again, I do have a nursery background, folks. I ran my own nurseries for over 32 years. And it's very easy to be project-led or theme-led rather than what the child is really interested. I think there's a part to play in that. I think, you know, it's important to bring things in that the children won't necessarily know anything about or experience at home. I think that's really important. But I think following the children's interests is much more important than following a theme on, I don't know,
Garden centres.
transport or the space. I mean, I don't understand why we do space in early years. I mean, children need to feel, touch, smell, really experience something firsthand. Space is very abstract to a young child, but that's my opinion. Do disagree with me in the chat.
Well, again, I think it's where the anchors are, isn't it? What the child's exploring. I have seen children have a trajectory scheme being very fascinated by motion and things in the air, and an introduction into planets and space has been absolutely really rewarding for them. I think that the real thing that I find about SchemaPlay is, and I don't know how familiar people are with schemes in the audience here, but when we can tune in to these, they're often defined as patterns of behaviour that children are showing us that they're keen to do. Now, initially, these patterns of behaviours that they're showing us, they're a novelty to them. But what we can do is, when we observe this pattern of behaviour and we see it in many different places, we can think about the environment that we're preparing for them. And for example, there was a little girl the other day, and there was a piece of guttering, and there was a drip coming through from it. There was a hole in the guttering, and she was watching the water just drop down. And I thought, this is very interesting. And then as I watched her throughout the day, she stood frozen as she watched a bucket go up and down on a pulley system. And then later I saw her with a seesaw putting something at the top and making it come down. And I thought, this child is absolutely seeming to be fascinated with up and down. Very common with a trajectory scheme. A trajectory scheme is all about lines, so horizontal, vertical, and we've got diagonal as well, so things that fly through the air. And this up and down, well, from the moment we're born, we're moved around a lot, aren't we? We're put up and down. And when we're sitting as babies, we see things going past us. Now, the trajectory scheme starts with children usually scanning, and they keep an eye on their key person or their provider because they want to know that we're reliable. And they want to know that right the way through their lives, don't they? But they want to know we're reliable. And once they realise that we can be trusted to respond when they need us, they then turn their attention to objects. And how we learn about what things are is by what they do. So this is great that they're doing that. But as they develop more and more in their schemes and explore their patterns of behaviour further, if we've prepared an environment for them, that trajectory scheme can open up so much. A fascination in motion and force, maybe, as we throw a ball. Up and down, height, length, distance as things travel through the air. So we really can tune in to, well, what's the scheme? What's the scheme they're applying? And then what do I understand about this play? And when we think about respect and valuing, when we're able to then say to a child, I saw you were watching that drip fall down into the bucket, and all day the water got more and more, didn't it? And the child says, yeah, and it got full to the top. And we say, do you know what? Over here, we've got some more water falling, and look at these containers. That could lend itself into an exploration of capacity and volume, but also by saying, you saw that water falling from that pipe. Have you seen this rhyme? And you introduce something like Incy Wincy Spider climbed up the water spout. They have some water to pour down. Down came the rain and washed the spider out. We're getting them interested in literacy. We can think about stories that have got up and down in them, because our language is embodied. It comes from our operational schemes. So if a child is exploring a trajectory scheme, the likely chances are maybe up and down, backwards and forwards. When we read stories that link into these explorations that they're enjoying, that's giving them a way into literacy. Frank Smith in the 1960s said that children needed to find a way into literacy. They needed to join the literacy club. It has to be meaningful for them.
I agree. Lynnette, I think you, just for the audience sake, you need to explain, because most people will will talk about schemas. They don't talk about in my experience, they don't talk about schemes and operational schemas, or operational schemes and schemas as separate things. In fact, I think a lot of people talk about schemas as the behaviour rather. So could you just explain what you mean by both terms? I'm not going to do it. You do it.
Okay. You know, it doesn't matter if you think about these operations as schemas, which they've commonly been referred to. In SchemaPlay, because of the new research that's come through in embodied cognition, and we go through this in our training, we have gone back to the distinction that Piaget made in his writings, The Mechanisms of Perception, in 1969, where he discriminated between a scheme and schema. Now, sadly, in England, we didn't get this translation through, and so we have tended to call them schemas. Now, please don't worry. If you call them schemas, don't worry. The most important thing is that we're looking at what children are doing, because if we can look at what children are doing, really look at what they're engaging in, and try to make sense and understand what they're doing, and we show them that we care about this and we affirm that and we respond, we're showing them that we really are interested and we value these. They can be very small things that they're doing, or they could be big things that we think, whoa, and had no idea you were able to do this, but we're showing we responding and valuing it. That's what really matters. I think you're going to probably push me on this distinction a little bit, aren't you? So I'll just give
a little bit, because I actually think it's quite helpful if you do actually understand it, because it certainly helped me. It made the child's interest, not just the behavior, but the actual child's interests, more important. Whereas I think schemas, people tend to see schemas as the behavior, and they forget about the context it's in and the reason and the subject around it, if that makes sense.
Okay, so for in our SchemaPlay context, and it doesn't matter how you refer to them, I just want to make this clear, but so in our SchemaPlay training, a scheme is an operation. So many of you will have heard of them maybe. We've got the trajectory scheme, which we've just discussed, which is the up and down, backwards and forwards and diagonal. You might have a child who loves containing, filling things, emptying things, sitting inside things. You might have a child who loves positioning, absolutely fascinated by how things can be put, maybe something on the edge of every table, maybe they're fussy about how their dinner is served up, maybe the sequence they get dressed in, and so forth. Or they might like connecting, which often starts with disconnecting, pulling things apart and then connecting, and that might lend itself to an exploration of height, length, as we connect one more train track. There's a lot of learning, cause and effect. If I connect this with this happens. So they're what we refer to as the schemes. A schema is the knowledge that children get from applying their schemes. So just to give some thought, okay, I've got a glass in front of me. How do we understand what a glass is? Well, culturally, we've learned that a glass contains something that we drink. So it's a container, and culturally we use it to drink from. If you were to look at maybe an object that you've never come across in your life before, and you're trying to work out what on earth this is, quite an interesting hair thing, maybe. What we can understand is that just to look at this, either whether it be a picture of it or the object itself, it's figurative. But how do we actually really understand what this is? Well, the only way we could truly know it is by understanding what you do with it, either seeing one being used or use one ourselves. So what the schema and scheme do is they help us to recognize, if you like, that every golden nugget of knowledge has two parts. How you understand a glass, well, you can recognize one, but how you understand what it truly is by what you use it for, what its affordances are, what you can do with it. if you take something like a cat and a dog, they're live, but how we distinguish between a cat and a dog, again, is by their affordances, their behaviours, what they do. So a dog tends to go on a lead for a walk. It woofs. It tends to run for a ball, pick it up and bring it back to you. Whereas a cat meows, probably isn't going to go and run after a ball. I've never seen a cat do this, but I could be proven wrong, and bring it back to you. They tend to scamper around with it and play with it in different ways, don't they? So really, the reason why in our SchemaPlay training we talk about this schema and schema distinction, and that's nothing to take away from any of the writing that you see on schemas about these operations, because they're in every book that's been written is very important. But because we're starting to know more about embodied cognition, we have decided that it's helpful now as we go forward. Now we've got more research coming through to be aware of this distinction, that every golden nugget of knowledge has two parts. How we understand something is by what it looks like, but also by what it does. And we need to have either used one or seen one being used ourselves.
So what is it?
This is used by people who take their horses to gymkhanas and they prepare them, get them ready. There's a hook here to
the tail,
clip there,
back a comb, special comb
for a coat, yeah. For but that's really the reason. But what we do in self-chosen free flow play, when we're talking about really showing children that we value and respect them, in SchemaPlay, we want children to be spending the majority of their day in self-chosen free play.
And you have a minimum sort of time, don't you? That you suggest you're advocating for children to have proper free play, which is something I've learned from you, Lynnette, and remembered. Would you like to share that? Because I think that's really important.
Yeah. In an ideal world, we would hope that children spend the majority of their day in self-chosen free play. But if you have smaller sessions and it's the majority of the time, I wouldn't like to think of any less than 2 hours being used. Because if you think about it, imagine you just started engaging with a puzzle. And then someone comes along and says, come on, tidy up, we're doing this now. And you're like 4 pieces of finishing your puzzle. Can you imagine how soul destroying that is? Children need a lot longer than we do to explore, to work things out, to see how things fit and do not fit. So when they have a scheme, maybe they're a container and they love containing, we would support a prepared environment where a child could have equality of access through their containing scheme. So equality of access doesn't mean the same for everyone, but it does mean tuning into a child, seeing what it is they love to do and what they're exploring, what their line of inquiry is, and working out how we can support a breadth of curriculum experiences from that. So in self-chosen free play, we would like children to go about their whole continuous provision, maybe going into block play. Oh, I love up and down. Great. In the art area. Oh, I love up and down. You can make those marbles and paint go up and down. Woo. Oh man, I love up and down. Look at this, what you can do outdoors. So wherever they go, there's something there. It's like a light shining on it that says to the child, yeah, come on, have a go. And what we have cleverly and expertly done is we've prepared an environment for children to take their schemes and to self-scaffold their own learning, to be able to think, I love up and down, look at this. And we know that because they've got the scheme capabilities to do it, giving them the time and the space and the respect to engage with it, to repeat it as often as they like, and I'm talking every day, not the activities here for this morning and then we don't see it again, that they know where to find it and they can engage with it. They are then going to become masterful. They will get scheme mastery and they will feel empowered. They're already empowered by us. If they're exploring a scheme a lot, that's something they're empowered by. And so don't we, boy, want to hold on to that empowered feeling and make sure that where we go next. So there is an element of self-scaffolding that we do before we even look at sustained shared thinking and taking them forward. We want to make sure that it is the scheme that they're exploring, and we want to give them opportunities to test drive it, to see how it fits and doesn't fit, getting a breadth of curriculum experiences before we even go on to really extending the play. So our first starting point is, have we got an environment?
But in many ways, that the environment experience that practitioners and educators are offering is extending the play.
Quite right. You're quite right. It is. It's supporting and extending. It's enabling them to self-scaffold, to become aware of their own capabilities, so that we hear, you know, hey, Mrs. Lynnette, look, come and see this. Look what I've done. Oh, man, when we get that, that is wonderful. Children have a right to take decisions for themselves. They have a right to lead their play, and they have a right to be active agents, to take agency in things. If we think about the rights of the child, the freedom of choice, the freedom of movement, the freedom of expression, we have to have a prepared environment that enables free flow play for children to be able to be in control, to feel in that they are empowered and they are self-assured. And so looking at children's schemes, seeing what they're empowered by is really, really valuable.
Okay, so our audience, how do you feel about this? Is this something that you're doing? Is this interesting to you? Do give us a little bit of feedback if you've got any questions. I find it absolutely fascinating. I can remember before I knew anything about any of this, when my daughter, and she's in her 30s now, when my daughter was very young, we had a low bookshelf. And for a long time, she used to take every single book out of that bookshelf every evening. My husband used to go absolutely mad because she was making a mess again. But I said, no, let her do it. And eventually she was putting all the books back. But, you know, to start with, it was just about taking the books out of this low bookshelf every single night. I mean, it got a bit monotonous. And then some months later, she got past that. She wasn't bothered. And then she went back to it. And she started then taking them out and then putting them back. So, you know, and if I'd stopped her, actually, it would have become a battle of wills. You know, she was around early twos. It would have become a battle of wills, and it would have been ugly and horrible. And obviously, she learned something from it because she needed to do it. And I see this all the time: children needing to do things, but adults stopping them midway. Makes me cringe. But we're all guilty of that. I'm sure we're all guilty of that because we can't always be in tune with every single child, particularly in group settings. You know, I'm sure, you know, we're all
it's a drive. It's a drive that we have to find out about our world. And that's what's very important. You know, this inside, I do it with my glass again, this inside and the outside and the barrier between the two is fascinating. You know, from the moment we're born, we come out of a womb. We're put in a cot, we're put into a high chair, we're put inside a room and outside a room, into a chair and out of a chair. So as soon as we're physically capable, this inside, outside, and the barrier between the two is very exciting to understand for ourselves. And who knows? We'd have to see how else she engaged in that containing. But often the containing scheme starts with emptying. What is it like when they all come out? And she's seeing something very different. She's seeing the space as those books come out. As she's putting them in, she might be getting aware of, you know, maybe not counting yet, but experiencing that there's quite a few that are going back in. So she's getting an idea that there was lots of things going in maybe. And all sorts of things could be coming from that. And this is what I think is really valuable, because when we talk to parents about schemes, in our respectful dialogue with parents, a lot of parents are frightened to talk to us because they think maybe their child is being naughty. And when they hear about schemes, it can be very empowering. I had a mum who came up to me at the end of some training and said, now I'm going to be honest with you then. She said, my child pulls out all the Cheerios from the cereal box onto the floor in the kitchen and then takes all the pots and pans out, and it drives me mad. She said, but you're telling me she's interested in how things can go in. And so she started to see different types of containers, different types of groups of objects. She reported back to me very soon. She said, I think my child is really interested in filling things to the top. I said, I think she's interested in capacity. I said, we've seen it in the nursery as well. She loves seeing how much the big water tube empties into two smaller ones. And we've also seen her, and this is what's really important for a container, having groups of objects to contain. She's been very interested testing out how groups of objects fit and don't fit in different types of containers.
Different sizes. Somebody's commented about Montessori here, and I agree with you. Montessori is the 3-part lesson, etc., is all around children building on their skills.
Yeah, I think what SchemaPlay can add to Montessorians is it can help them to think about what the child is doing with the materials that they have on the shelf. So, for example, Montessori's, the materials have been carefully selected. She prepared an environment. But if you've got a child who loves pouring from one jug into another, containing and trajectory being explored, and you see them going to pouring into equal containers, so going a bit further now, seeing how that one jug falls into others, and then you see them over in something called the knob cylinders. For those of you who are not aware of Montessori, it's these cylinders that drop into sockets. Again, that's containing. Now, as Montessorians, we learn that children are exploring dimensions, seeing how things fit in. But if you know you've got a child that's particularly interested in containing things, and maybe you see them in the role play, exploring with bags, and maybe they like the supermarket role play or the cafe role play, filling the things with water, you've then got an idea of how you can extend from the activities that you have on the shelf, so that you can open up lots of meaningful context depending on what they know about, depending on what their interests are, and maybe making new activities for the shelf, or maybe they're off the shelf activities that are being engaged in. But I think SchemaPlay can be very empowering for Montessorians, especially when it comes to thinking about the stories that are being read. How is that storyline meaningful? How does the child participate in what they love to do? How is that being enabled in the storytelling through props so that the child can revisit it independently? If you know you've got a child who's empowered by a particular scheme and is selecting those sort of Montessori activities around that scheme, then that can be really empowering. I know Montessori is very good for looking at what children can do, it very much in line with Vygotsky, seeing what the child can do, seeing how we can take them forward within their capabilities to a new challenge. I think schemes can be another way of enabling that, especially when you think about your knowledge and understanding of the world moving into that. But for role play, for outdoor learning, for thinking about the trips that we may go on and the walks that we do in the environment, if you've got children particularly fascinated by a particular scheme, that can be a great way into promoting language as well.
Yes, it's really interesting, because obviously language development is really, really important, and there's a lot of emphasis being put on telling stories at the moment, in lots of different ways. I hadn't actually thought about using stories, schemes and stories together, to be honest. That's very interesting. Okay.
Do you remember Toby, Catherine? Toby, he was a little boy. I think we both came across him together. He loved containing. And one day he shouted out, he'd been in the outdoor environment, containing a lot. And then he'd come across a shopping trolley, which had been seeded specifically for the containing. And he was putting things in and moving them around. And then all of a sudden he shouted out, I can't find one. So his practitioner hadn't stepped into the play at that point up until then, but then thought this is appropriate. So she said, what are you looking for, Toby? And he said, I'm recycling. And the practitioner
That's
thought,
right, I remember him.
I don't know what you know about recycling. But clever Cara, the practitioner, because thinking on her feet, she said to Toby, knowing he could contain, Toby, I've got something in the classroom that I think you might enjoy. And she came back with a little recycling truck. Knowing he could contain, she explained to him how the plastics would go in one and the card would go in another and the tin. And he said, come on, let's do it. And they went and found some buckets and they started recycling. And he was really empowered by this. So they went on, well, he and his mum went to the recycling centre and he put his head out through the sunroof. Now, what Cara did next was really great. She seeded resources around what she thought he might see at the recycling centre. And she got a clipboard, a pen, a high vis, big bins. And when he came back and was so excited to share everything, they then sat down and read a story about recycling. And in it, it talked about putting things in containers, something that he's been loving to do for a long time. He was fixated by it. She had props so he could do it at that part. He then went out into the garden. She said, "Look, Toby, would you like to make your own recycling centre?" And he set that up. And we saw children arriving and him saying, "Let me take your name." And he was mark making. He'd seen a purpose for making marks. He was sorting, matching, categorizing, great mathematics. Aligns to those of you who work in a Montessori setting to think about where you go next on your shelves, but great into cosmic education. But he then got so excited by this, he started to want to count what he'd got collected each day. That then transferred to an upcycling centre where he became in charge of tallying every day how many things he had. Big cartons, small cartons, card, tin, and children were using it to do their junk modelling or whatever it was. And whenever they ran out, he went back to his recycling centre to top it up. He's at primary school and he now takes agency in running the recycling centre. That is empowerment.
I have a funny feeling it might just move into adulthood here. and that's that brings up another point really that we really believe in at Spark. It's not just about your continuous provision. It's about how you enhance it, and how and this seeding part. I forgot about that word actually, Lynnette. Seeding the play, seeding the areas, the learning spaces within your setting to encourage children into those areas and to follow their own journey. To be
a match to them, because what we want is we want learning to be meaningful or to have continuity. What do I mean by continuity? That children can make connections. It makes sense to them that, if you like, it's like having a journey in the learning journey. You know how sometimes you see a learning journey and there's snapshots of children doing things and they're very unrelated, and you think, how have they got to this? When we can see this is what a child's been doing, this is what they've been exploring, we've seeded an environment so they can self-scaffold, take their play a bit further forward. Then there might be this motion where a child says something like, "That's a long one." Well, then, if they're getting to that point and acknowledging things, where could we have this meeting of minds now? What I think the EPI and REPI research referred to as sustained shared thinking, that helping a child to evaluate something, to make sense of something, to extend a narrative. And when the child says it's a long one, or when they go up, they burst, they're not throwaway statements. So this meeting of minds, this tuning in now, this is where we start to extend the play. We come in, it's a very small spin of the play for them to take that back into their independent play and make more sense of it. But we're doing what Vygotsky said, a child can go maybe so far and then they need that social context, that stepping in. And it's that meeting of minds. And I think what schemes can help us to do is to see what the child's really doing, and then to try and understand what are they getting from it, but genuinely care. Genuinely care. The child who sits on a sofa at 6 months of age and got a ball in their hand and is giggling as they throw the ball. The ball is not the interest. A 6-month-old baby doesn't know that that's a ball yet. The interest is that they can make something move themselves. They're exploring motion and force and potentially gravity. But that's what we want. We want to be genuinely interested in children and genuinely wanting the connections.
it's moving away. For me, it's moving away from providing a painting activity, a building activity, you know, where you have a room where you have all these learning spaces. And yes, you will have your bricks. Yes, you will have your car play area. Yes, you will have your home corner, and you'll have your technology. You'll have all of those, and you'll have your activity tables. But instead of setting up an activity that is around a subject, it needs to be around, for us, it would be around the skills the child needs to learn. Okay, for us using Spark, it would be about scaffolding the child's learning, but it's also about how to alter that to suit the needs of every child. And currently within our software, we can easily do that. We can easily pull up, and we know exactly what stage every child is at with their scissors. Okay, so we can help the ones that are snipping, and we can help the ones that are cutting around things, and we give them the right resources because we know their stage of using scissors. But actually, it's much more than that, isn't it? It's about understanding that actually this child might come and to choose that activity because actually we're cutting across things. We're making, you know, we're cutting lines, or we're making ladders, or, you know, whatever it is. We need to take it on one step further than that. It's not just about their stage of development. It's about how we can use their behavior to keep their interest in this, something that perhaps they're not that interested in.
For example, it could be just that they're interested in disconnecting if they're snipping pieces apart. So it's really, it's one observation's not enough. We need to see, you know, is this child that's fascinated by cutting things and seeing it fall into the pot as they snip? Are they disconnecting and connecting in different ways? What is their line of inquiry? What's really going on for them to really help them to so that we can respond in an appropriate way? We can show that the child that we really are keen to know what is going on for you so that we can respond effectively.
Okay, so let's ask the people that are listening who may have 10, maybe more key children who they are who they have a relationship with, or who they are responsible for ensuring that the child's needs are being met by the team. Okay, because they're not necessarily always working when the child is there. How are you feeling about this, folks? Because I think it's quite a tall order, actually. You know, you could have 24 children in a 3s to 5s room, let's just say, and you could have 50 children using that room in a week, for example. That might be a bit too many, but you know, you could have a lot of children using that room in a week. So how do you guys feel about that? Because for me, I'm thinking I need equipment for transporters. I need things for trajectory. I need things for those that want to be enveloped in things, get into things. You know, there's quite a lot of things here that potentially you need to be providing all at once in some ways. Sorry, Lynnette.
No, it's a fair comment. I think your continuous provision needs to be aware that children will explore patterns of behaviour. And if we don't provide an environment to enable them to do that, they're going to do it. If they don't have an environment to enable them to do it, you'll start to see behaviour that maybe is a little bit challenging. They will want to do it. There's no stopping them.
It's like the baby who wants to put the coconut matting in their mouth. They have to do it, don't they? Because until they've done it, they know they don't want to do it anymore.
Yeah. And observation is key. Observation is key. You might have 50 children, but I hope everybody is observing what their children are doing. If not, we're not offering quality education. If we're not responding to children, and if we are always putting ourselves on them, how do we know what a child can do and what a child knows? how are we supporting those learning connections? If we're always saying, right, well, I'm going to set this up and I'm going to do that and I'm going to do that because we think it's lovely, aesthetically pleasing, beautiful, it's no good if it's not meaningful to the child. And I hate to be as harsh as that, but that is the exact thing. It's absolutely no good.
I just want to bring up another point here that I feel very strongly about. And I'm sorry if somebody's heard me say this before. I mean, just because Ofsted don't need to see your observations doesn't mean to say you shouldn't be making them. And for me, it's no good just having them in your head, because if you leave or the child moves rooms, who's going to take that? Who's, you know, basically somebody's got to learn that child from scratch. And that's not fair. I don't think that's fair on the child or the member of staff, actually, to have a child that you know very little about, you know, in the transition period. So for me, observations are key, and I don't care whether Ofsted need to see them or not. I think every good educator needs to keep some sort of formal type of observations.
I think we're all in early years because we're passionate that we want children to be contributing members of the community, to have a joy of learning, to feel success. And, you know, very young children, they're not always aware of their capabilities. Sometimes we have to point them out and say, I've seen you like to do this, so have you seen that? But we need them to become aware. But very importantly, I think, is we need to trust in the child. We really need to trust in children to pull the curriculum along. They will pull the curriculum along, but you've got to be open to seeing that and to making sense of what you're seeing and responding to that.
Yeah.
Please trust in the child. It really is important.
I'm going to read this out. I think it does seem like a tall order when first introduced, but it actually is working smarter, not harder. It's following the child in a more meaningful way, which is more useful to practitioners. These well-supported, self-directed children will have a greater independence and higher levels of well-being, allowing practitioners more time to continue to provide appropriate resources and scaffold. And I absolutely agree with that.
Here. Thank you, Kate.
But I also think, Lynnette, a lot of what you're saying also applies to the educator. You know, we in early years need the respect of the community around us too. You know, we need to know, people need to know how important our role is, how important it is to get it right for little children, for their future. And so by taking away our integrity, and I think sometimes Ofsted leads too much on what good practice should be. I think we as educators know what good practice is, and we should have the confidence to do what's right for our children, and for the rest, and the team, and our parents, because parents really have a really important role to play here in early years. You know, and it's our role, I think, to also educate and help them understand what's going on with their children.
I think everybody's got an important role to play. I do think Ofsted have an important role to play too. But I think what we can do is when we trust in the child and we enable them to show us what they can do and we value it and we respond. I like what you just said very much there about the discussion with parents, but obviously other professionals. Some children with special educational needs have a wealth of people around them. It provides a shared dialogue. And I think what I love about SchemaPlay is it provides a shared dialogue, whether you're new into early years or whether you've got a PhD in early years. It's a shared dialogue that we can all have. And that opens up as all talking the same talk, walking the same walk, all of us really showing we're caring. Now, when children are exploring schemes, you heard me mention things like capacity, volume, length, height. I saw a child this week exploring a rotating scheme, and yes, she was exploring friction. Now, we need to be aspirational for children. We need to tune in to what it is that they are really, really getting out of their play. And when we can start to share language, like they're exploring capacity, we've seen them exploring quantity, volume, they're exchanging. They're in cafe role play, exchanging. They're taking money for something. They're finding out about early economics. When we start to showcase ourselves for the great work that we, all of us, are doing, and we're working so hard. I think if people can hear that language, maybe they might not think that we're just maybe
childminders.
childminders.
No, I don't mean a childminder. I mean people that mind children.
Yeah, I think if we can feel confident to talk about what we're seeing in children's play, that as they're exploring a big tube into two small ones and then seeing how that fits, and we talk about them exploring volume and capacity, and we see them in the sandpit, they're not making sandcastles, they're absolutely full, and then they love Goldilocks and the Three Bears with props. Yes, I'm exploring size, capacity, volume. Let's talk the talk that these very young children deserve us to be speaking about. They are leading great learning, and we are, if you like, facilitators of that great learning. And we are really, yes, of course, we're making sure children are healthy, that they've got a good diet, that they're safe. Of course, we must do all of that. But we also can really be showcasing, actually, we're really good at this. And actually, we are supporting great scientific, great mathematical, great language development as we provide stories with props that link into children's schemes and their inquiries and investigations. It's really valuable. And I think, we are a brilliant sector. And I want us to raise our head above the parapet and say, look what our children are learning. Our children will showcase what we do, but we have to trust in the child. We have to respect, value, and affirm and respond. And if we can do that really brilliantly, we have empowered, motivated children taking agency, because learning is holistic and it's dynamic.
Yeah.
And we need to respond and respect that. And I know everybody that's online now, and anybody who's going to watch this later, has that in their belly, that passion, that power.
Otherwise they wouldn't be here. They wouldn't be here.
Yeah, we've got these people online and watching and know this.
We really, I think I was an Ofsted inspector, so I do respect Ofsted, but I do I just disagree with that. Just because Ofsted don't need to see it, we still need to be doing it. And I know on social media there's lots of people who just will document wow moments. Well, for me, that isn't enough, because we also need to know where the gaps are. We need to know, and we need to find a way of helping those children fill those gaps.
And we want to know, don't we? How did they get there? What are the schemes that they've had to get there? Because children will combine schemes. They're not static. When you cook your dinner and you make an omelette, you're pouring, trajectory, you're containing, you're rotating with a whisk. When we're driving, we're up and down with pedals. Schemes are actually prerequisites to reading, writing, adding and subtracting. They get combined and chunked together. And just like when we're driving and we've learned to take those life and death worries that we have when we're first learning, we learn to chunk it and it becomes natural, doesn't it? Well, that's the same with reading. We don't say, oh, hang on a moment, let me just, draw a trajectory line. And we don't talk about that, do we? But I think you're right, Catherine. I think, yes, we need to be observing, and I think, yes, Ofsted maybe they are looking at things and how they can do things.
And actually, if a setting is doing things well, they don't need to see observations, because it'll be just part of life. It's part of a practitioner's practice. The thing that worries me is that people, because Ofsted are not going to see it, they're not doing it. And that's the bit that worries me. And I think that takes away a little bit from our integrity as a profession. And we do also need to be, we also as a profession need to feel as confident as you, Lynnette.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm seeing it actually in nurseries where a child might be using an enclosing scheme and exploring shape and space, but because it's not in the curriculum at the moment, they're not going down that line. And, of course we're going to go down that line, and we're going to open up a breadth of curriculum from what they're really wanting to do. So I do think the trust in the child, if we can really look at children and respond to them, it does require pedagogical knowledge. And I think when we help each other and mentor each other in the settings, that's really important, isn't it?
Absolutely. And you do lots of training, don't you, Lynnette?
Yes, we do. By all means, visit our website, www.schemaplay.com.
It's coming up. It's coming up. Don't worry.
And yes, feel free to contact us through the contact page there. So yes, we do. And we're really looking to to support a whole community, childminders, nurseries, reception class teachers, and we've even just recently been working with foster parents, and I think that's also links in really well to what you're doing as well at Spark, Catherine, with your great work now of supporting parents. I'm really impressed by that. I think that's really exciting.
Because actually, I'm thinking of foster parents. Having worked with lots of children who've been in care in the past, before I set my nurseries up, I can imagine schemes as being really very therapeutic, actually, aren't they? You know, if a child is doing what they feel most comfortable with, then for children who have had trauma of some description in their, well, just being removed from their parents is trauma enough, isn't it? You know, I can see that as being really good. Obviously, also for all of our children's well-being too.
Yeah, I think when children are anxious and overwhelmed, and children are anxious and overwhelmed even when they come into our settings, aren't they? But especially if they've had some form of trauma, we need to really see what they feel in control of. We've got to find what they feel in control of. And so scheme spotting, you know, because it's no matter how small that is, whatever it is that they're doing, whether it be sitting on the floor as one child was doing and just connecting some paper clips, and seeing that connecting scheme and thinking about how I can support that and what I might put out to engage with my child and to build that relationship and show that I notice they love to do that. Yes, I think it's really valuable, just as, you know, many parents have said, oh gosh, I just thought it was naughty behavior.
Yes.
It can help with transitions. It can help us to get to really know our children very well, and to, with support, to be thinking about, you know, how we might help, and you know, helping parents to be able to offer resources at home. And they can just be household objects. They don't need to spend money. It can be things that they see on a trip and on a walk as well. But it can be a great relationship builder, very empowering for the child to feel that control coming through. So very valuable.
With our Spark at Home, that's exactly what we're doing. We're encouraging parents to be stage appropriate, so they're not actually asking their child to do something before they can. So they're not forcing the children to have bad habits, okay? But also using just their daily routines. You know, they don't have to go out and do a particular activity at the weekend or anything like that, although it'd be nice if they took their child to the park and threw a ball, you know, a ball, or kick a ball. But, you know, they can use their everyday routines and to help children expand their thinking and their learning through that way. You know, we've got a society that feels they've got to go out and buy a toy that does this and buy a toy that does that, when actually, you know, a lot of loose parts and routines, etc., just quite adequate.
Children learn through imitation, don't they? And I remember when I was a child, desperate to be able to reach the washing up bowl to be able to wash up. I've seen children come into nursery bringing out all sorts of characteristics of things that they've seen at home. And that's why a dialogue with parents is so important. But I remember one little boy coming with a pen over his ear. And I just watched to see what was going on, and he was going around sighing and tutting, and the next thing I know, he's got a block and he's putting it against things, and he's measuring, and he's really wanting to be a measurer. So giving him that opportunity now to, well, he's got one block, but maybe if we put one block on top of another, we might be able to see the height, see the length.
I mean, you notice that, but if a parent can actually correspond with you at a time that suits them and say, we'll be doing lots of building work this weekend, or Dad's been making a wardrobe, or I don't mean to be sexist about it, but we've been making a wardrobe, or we've been building a fence or what have you, then the fact that you actually know that information, the parent feels valued, that you're going to use that information to do something in nursery to extend that in some way at nursery, like the recycling, really. She took her child Toby to the recycling centre. The practitioner brought in some ideas about recycling. I mean, that's so powerful, isn't it, for that child?
But what you just said was very, very important, that the parent hears what we did with that information. So in SchemaPlay training, when parents are sharing things about the schemes and how it's been applied and the context it was applied in, our training supports practitioners to be able to use that information, but also to let the parent know what they did. Schemes are very empowering for parents, but if they don't hear back how it made a difference, they can stop the lines of communication.
Exactly.
So what you just said was absolutely bang on the money. We need to make sure we're letting parents know what we did and how it made a difference. Very, very important. Yeah.
And also bridging home and nursery, or home and preschool, or home and childminder, together, making it a whole thing for the child is so important for well-being and for future mental health. And I think I'm very opinionated, me, but I think that again, working with parents isn't really taken on board. I'm being very judgmental across the sector, but a lot of settings, are not really embracing this as much as they could be, for whatever it may be, their confidence, it may be a lack of understanding on how important it is, but so much more. And I know, because we've done our own little research on it, children whose parents use our Spark at Home app with our software, they are not being hot-housed. They're not being pushed to do things before they're ready, but they do make more progress than those parents who had the opportunity where practitioners just haven't been able to get them on board. We have other things in our software that those parents can participate with, but it's amazing the power that parents have in helping their children's development, and yet many parents don't really understand how important they are. They think feeding, bathing, reading the bedtime story, and perhaps an outing at the weekend is enough.
I think a wealth of experiences is really important, isn't it? The EPI research found that when children have a very good home learning environment, so as your research has found, that they have better learning outcomes. So without a doubt, we need this respectful dialogue. But for the child as well, we need to know about what they've been loving to do outside of the nursery and what they know about.
As educators, we need parents to help us as well. It's not just us informing parents. We need parents to help us too. It's not enough. I was talking about what's not enough for the parent. I don't think it's enough for educators just to be providing the parents with a few nice pictures, and the parent can say, "Oh, my child's happy, I'm fine."
I think a respectful dialogue is something we all really need to strive towards. I feel very passionate about this. A lot of the parents, when we engaged in the initial SchemaPlay research, they were saying that they'd felt scared to talk to they called them teachers. Well, we are teachers, don't get me wrong, but they said we're scared to talk to them. We're scared to say something wrong or to get something wrong. And they found that when they were talking about schemes, it sort of gave them the okay to let people know what their children were doing at home. And once you've got that dialogue open, then we can't lose it. And
and it has to start really. It's really difficult to impose that on parents. It really has to start when the parent comes to look round, or even before then. To sort of set an expectation and get the parents interested and involved from really early days, I think. And then it's almost the parent sort of laps it up, really. They can't get enough of it.
Of course, it's their child. They want them to do well,
Exactly.
don't they? Everybody's aspirational for their own children. Most people are really aspirational. I just saw what Khadija's written here about the brain development, but also the growing up and down, the growth and developing. Well, what we've done, Khadija, at SchemaPlay is we've mapped the schemes that children explore to reading, writing, adding and subtraction. And you're very, very right. All learning is emergent, and just like we're all very familiar with emergent literacy, aren't we? And we're very aware that, you know, a line down and a cross, we need to be able to see that before children start to be able to for the letter T, the letter F, and we all know that anti-clockwise direction, that enclosed space, that rotation,
we call it 1 o'clock on
O and A and C. So we do know that, but all learning is emergent, so it's not just literacy. Children are combining schemes and chunking them together when it's meaningful for them to do so, to read, write, add, subtract, engage in things like conservation, consumption, reduction. In SchemaPlay, we embed sustainability into our SchemaPlay curriculum wheel, which is really about trusting in the child and going forward. So absolutely. And I will ask you, when you go to make your supper tonight, if you haven't already eaten like me, have a think about what schemes, if you are familiar with them, are you using when you do prepare your supper tonight? Because we're using schemes all day, every day.
And analyze your friends. Analyze your friends. I've been doing a lot of that in preparation again for tonight. I've been analysing my friends because it's amazing how, as adults, I mean, I've moved house recently, and I'm a transporter. Now, you'd think I'd love it, wouldn't you? Transporting stuff from one side of the well, from Essex to Suffolk, but actually, I'm a transporter, and I have to have everything in containers. So everything has to go in containers for me, whether it's baskets or cardboard boxes or buckets. I've got a lot of IKEA buckets. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with all my IKEA buckets because I've downsized. But I've got a great big tower of IKEA buckets. If anybody wants some IKEA buckets, just let me know. And instinctively, I just have to do it that way, you know.
Well, you know what, Catherine, because of all your past experiences of transporting and containing, when you came to moving house, you were able to think about what would be the best containers to help you transport various different things. When a child has a containing scheme and we provide them with a range of different ways to containing, they're finding out about the relevance of those objects and their uses. And therefore, when they come to engage in something like move house or have to move something for a purpose, because of their past experiences in applying a containing scheme in a range of different ways, they're able to think, oh, let me use a box for that. Let me use a soft wrapping and enclose that. Let me use a stacking box for that. That's how we learn to negotiate our lives, to make sense and problem solve our way through things. We're drawing
also
upon
spatial awareness as well. My spatial awareness is really good. I know how much I can get into the back of a car. You know, I just instinctively know that will fit. Don't worry about it. It will fit.
Can I ask you, do you like doing car boot sales?
No, I don't, but I know I've got to do lots. Okay, we've got a comment here. Respectful dialogue can be very tricky to sustain as every parent carer has different expectations for their child's early education experiences. Absolutely. And I think using schemas should be very useful as it's something that can be actively seen by the parents and carers and supports a shared conversation. I totally agree with you. And in our software, we have different ways of working with parents. So we want parents to engage with us and with their child's learning, but you know, the app isn't always the most appropriate way for that parent because they're not ready for it yet. So we have simpler ways. So the idea is that every parent is engaged and then we move them up. And if anybody's interested, I can send you a little video on how that works. So that we don't just accept that a parent isn't interested, you know, the parent that just pushes their child through the door in the morning, you know, and you hardly have a conversation with them. they don't get away with it in a Spark nursery or a nursery that uses Spark for that reason. So
we had an interesting situation actually with a father coming into a nursery not so long ago, demanding why his 2-year-old wasn't yet writing. And
I'm not learning anything.
And you know, in the past, I know I've probably said, and colleagues have said, well, when they're ready, right? But actually, what we found is by being aware of how schemes are combined to support later complex operations, this particular practitioner was very aware that this child loved matching, and it wasn't an enforced matching, because I'm really against people saying let's match colours, let's match this, but it was coming from the child. He was very excited by similarities and differences and really liked putting things in groups, and so she said, she said, it's really exciting that you really want your daughter to go on to write, and she will, but we've got to respect what childhood is. When they're 2, they need to be 2, and when they're 3, they need to be 3. And at the moment, at 2, your daughter is really loving matching. And do you know what the great thing about that is? She's exploring similarities and differences. And she said it's a really hard thing to see the difference between a letter O and a letter A. She said, if you want to continue, please do. She said, it would be so exciting for us to hear what you're doing at home, and you can match and show and let us know what your child's been doing. Maybe you've been matching things on a walk or something like that. That would be brilliant. And so the dad was like, oh, right, okay. And he was happy. He realised that we were on the ball and we know what we're doing. and we trust that, it has to come from the child. We can never. My colleague John, John's Sarah Splatchford, who I set up SchemaPlay with initially, he once said to me, back in the 70s, there used to be stickers on the back of people's bumpers on the cars, and it said, if you can read this, thank a teacher. Well, I can honestly tell you, we never teach a child to read. It is pulled together in a creative act. It is a combination of schemes that get combined, clustered, and later chunked. So it's a creative act. All learning is a creative act, and it's a creative act by the child when it is meaningful to them.
And they're ready for it.
When it's meaningful to them, we have to look for that meaningfulness, because that's they'll pull it together when they want to. Yeah, when they're ready.
I agree with that, because with Spark, observations are really very, very quick. You can write long observations if you like, but observations are really very quick. And the idea is that you're still engaging with the child all the time. You're not having to spend time away writing things up, etc. And nobody can keep on top of what the child actually knows, because the software is actually helping them provide those enhanced things within the environment and those other activities, and the children just fall into achieving the skills and the knowledge that we're hoping that they're going to achieve.
Wow, I need to come and take a look at this software.
Seriously, because everybody's on board, everybody's looking out for, everybody's trying to facilitate it. And I really want to, Lynnette, I really want to embrace SchemaPlay in this, to see if we can make, we already do have schemes within our software, but we want to take this one step forward. Just haven't quite found how to do that yet.
Yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it? Because you've got the child's voice in there.
To actually, for all the reasons we're talking about tonight, for all the reasons we're talking about this evening.
Well, that sounds very exciting, because it would be interesting as well. I mean, I have no idea about software and things like that. I really don't. But I'm very excited, with AI, and I do wonder how that will all pan out. But, thinking about, the schemes that have been applied and the child's voice, when those statements that sometimes we think as throwaway statements, oh, that was a long way, or whoa, look what happens, it just disappears. they're the things that we need to be tuning into with the scheme, so that we've got that meeting of minds, that sustained shared thinking taking place.
We've actually thought about putting auditory into the software. The
Oh,
trouble is, you
brilliant.
can't catch it, can you? You can't just turn the machine on because the child's about to say something.
But the practitioner can hold that in their mind and
yes,
look to see.
And they can record it,
Yeah,
right.
brilliant.
Come on, folks. Any questions? Anything you disagree with? I haven't got a clue what time is. Time always goes too quick. Yes, we are well over time. But has anybody got any other comment or anything they'd like to say? Okay, all right. Nobody's got. We'll just wait a couple of seconds, because sometimes, just like the children, people need to have a little time to think before they actually say anything. I'll just look at my notes and see if we've covered everything I wanted to. Family connections, fascinations, interests. Oh, there is one thing though I'll just bring in, just to throw something into the mix. I do think we need to bring in, well, we have said it, but we want things to be child-centered, okay? But we also need to bring in experiences the children haven't had yet. Just because they're not asking for it, all right, or indicating for it, we still need to be bringing things in, all right? So, for example, and I'm going to use, for example, if we're not in a Chinese community, if we don't have a Chinese community around us, we should be recognizing Chinese New Year. We should have a wok, okay? Because those children will come across Chinese people in the future. Just because we don't have anybody in our setting, so we're not got people asking about a wok or asking about Chinese New Year, we do need to still be providing those things. I just throw that into the mix.
I think it's a very, I mean, that's a whole different topic in some
respects. But it's still schemas. You know, you can still use a container schema with a wok.
Rather than look at similarities and understanding people around the world, which would just take us into another sustainability, global citizenship and stuff. But from a schemes perspective, yes. I mean, yes for both, but it's so broad, and we could be here till gone midnight.
Yes, we
could.
From
a schemes perspective, that seeding that we do for a child to see how their scheme fits and does not fit in a range of contexts. Of course, what we want to do is we want to bring a world to the child, so that they do start to, you know. I remember one little boy was absolutely fascinated by matching, and it was the same little boy I was talking about earlier, and they put a xylophone in the music area with a card to follow, which was his favorite song, and the adult model just playing it for a short time, and the child came along and he was like fascinated, and she was pointing to the color and showing how she was matching it to the xylophone. His little face, he loved music, and he was just so excited to think that he could make the music himself to the song that he loved. But getting children into arts, finding out about things, of course, but yes, from their capabilities, from what they feel empowered by, so that we don't introduce things and they just think, oh, I can't do it, because that would be awful.
No, that's right. No.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay, folks. Well, thank you very much for coming this evening.
Yeah.
And I'm going to play us out with Lynnette's details, so you can get hold of both of us. And do feel free to contact both of us. We both like to hear from you. Let me just play it.